Okay, good morning, everyone. Scott Biondo, today's speaker, is the Director of Community Security for the Jewish Federation and the broader St. Louis Jewish community. He's going to discuss how to proactively protect yourself and your family, increase your situational awareness, and reduce your chance of becoming a crime victim. He has specialized training with law enforcement and federal agencies, including the Secret Service, FBI, ATF, and Homeland Security. So Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you for your presentation this morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this morning, where we'll be discussing what I consider to be a very, very important topic. Unfortunately, in today's day and age, better to be vigilant and prepared than to be unprepared. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can do that. I just wanted to take a few seconds to discuss sort of my role with the Federation and how we go about keeping this particular community safe. I think it's important for people to know what's being done. In my role as the Director of Community Security, I have an overarching security responsibility for all Jewish organizations in the St. Louis metropolitan area. And in addition to that, because our Federation believes in outreach and believes in reaching those folks that do not have resources elsewhere, we've expanded that role to include outstate Missouri. So I have another 7 locations in outstate Missouri. One of them I actually was part of the metropolitan area, and that's our camp in Rocky Mount, Missouri at the Lake of the Ozarks, Camp Sabra. But I have facilities in Joplin, Springfield, 3 in Columbia, Missouri, and 1 in Jeff City. On the east side, we've extended our outreach to Southern Illinois to include Belleville, Benton, 3 locations in Carbondale, and actually Paducah, Kentucky. So my area of responsibility stretches from on the east, Paducah, Kentucky, to on the west, Joplin, Missouri. So we try to provide resource security guidance for all of the organizations that fall within that area of responsibility. One of the main components of my job is investigation and intelligence. Last year, we opened 216 investigations into some level of hate contact, anti-Semitic contact, or Holocaust denial. And these come in every form of media that you can imagine. They come in form of email contacts, web portal contacts, telephone calls, and literally good old-fashioned snail mail, where someone mails us a letter. Some of these contacts are also in person. So, we investigate each and every one of those to determine if we're having someone that's exercising their First Amendment right to free speech, or if they potentially represent a threat to this community. We also manage all special events to determine if our event has the potential of being something that could be considered controversial, or maybe possibly, direct the attention of somebody that would have nefarious intentions for the community. And then in addition to that, we do a lot of projects within the community. I consult on all construction projects in the community to ensure that our physical security aspects are covered during construction. We work with our community entities in programs like the Department of Homeland Security non-for-profit security grant program. And I can tell you that since today, June 1, is the deadline for our grant applications. I can tell you exactly how many we did. So this year we assisted 17 of our organizations with applying for the Homeland Security grant, as well as 2 additional outreach organizations that we worked with. One of which was the Islamic Center of St. Louis, and the other one was the E-Factory Incubator, which is part of Missouri State University in Springfield, Missouri. So we also do a lot of outreach in the community. We also work with our interfaith partnership, and we have a lot of law enforcement liaison and outreach. I am an intelligence liaison officer for 3 fusion centers, 1 in St. Louis, 1 in mid-Missouri, and 1 in Southern Illinois. And that allows us to monitor situations that we might feel might be threatening to the community and take action if necessary. So it's a really broad scope job, and we accomplish a lot. We try to be very, very proactive in keeping our community safe. So let's go ahead and move forward with the presentation for today. And I guess I'll just I don't know if the comment was made, Laura, if you made this, but what we're going to do is we're going to try to go through the presentation in totality and get through the whole thing in respect of people's time. And then if there are any questions, I always allot for a significant amount of time after my presentations to make sure that each and every question is answered. If you feel like you might forget the question, feel free to put it in the chat box so that we can go back and answer those questions and not have to fear that you might have forgotten about the question. So with that, I'm going to go ahead. I'm sorry, what was that? Yes.
I did get one comment that one person is not seeing the slide. So I just want to make sure that everyone is seeing Scott's presentation. Is there anyone else who's having a problem seeing it?
Not seeing it.
It looks like Mike is having trouble,
Right.
but the screen is shared, so I'm really not sure.
Is everyone else seeing it? Everyone seems to be shaking their head yes.
No,
No?
Wait, we're not seeing it also?
no. Fran Hoffman, I'm not seeing it.
I am.
Marjorie Sofer Wood, I'm not seeing it. I dialed it.
All I see is the screen that says Jewish Federation of St. Louis.
Yes, that's it.
Community Security.
That's it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I see too.
That is the beginning of the program. Here, I'll advance it. Now, if you see, do you see Safety Smarts?
Safety Smarts,
Yeah.
I see it now. Fran
So this
Hoffman,
is,
I see it.
okay, so we're good, you're good. All right, so we'll just jump in. So today's topic is titled Safety Smarts, Personal Security Do's and Don'ts. It's going to be a little bit broader than that. We're actually going to cover some information that maybe you didn't think we were going to cover in this program, but I think it's very important, and I think it's something that will be beneficial for you to know and understand, and it might also invoke some interesting conversations. So with that, without any further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk a little bit about threats. What are threats? Where do threats come from? Have they happened? Those kinds of things. And then we're going to talk about something that sounds, kind of spyish, something that sounds like a really interesting technique. And you're going to find that this is something you can use in your everyday life, and it's called situational awareness. It's being aware of the things that are going on around us. We're going to talk about that and what constitutes that. And then we're going to just talk about some security tips. So we're going to go through things like security at home and security on the go, things that you can use in your home, the place that you stay, your residence, or, when you're out and about, and pretty much anywhere. Most of the training that we do in the community is applicable to being elsewhere. So we train our people. Yesterday, for instance, I trained approximately 40 early childhood center staff for the J from both the Millstone campus and the Fox campus on active attacker, what to do in that kind of a situation. Of course, everybody has the Uvalde, Texas situation on their minds, and people that are in that line of work taking care of children are especially concerned. And so we made sure that we offer the training on the heels of incidents like that. And I'm not going to talk a lot about that particular incident, and I'm going to tell you why. We often get into conversations about things that occur and make comments and make assessments and speculate when there's still a lot of information that has to come to the forefront. And I think if any of you are following that, you probably recognize that this is already occurring, that daily information is changing. And I think it's very important for us to have the totality of the information before we start making comments about it or before we start learning from it. So with that, we'll move forward into threats. So what is the threat? I'm going to tell you about threats and how we look at threats in my line of work, in my world. So two kinds of threats: internal threats and external threats. First, we're going to talk a little about what constitutes an internal threat. So if you're an organization or you're part of an organization or you live in a place that is, maybe multi-tenant or something of that nature, there are always the possibility for internal threats. Some of these internal threats may be, for instance, a disgruntled employee, a staff member at that location, the maintenance person or the housekeeping person or the person that staffs the cafeteria. If they're not happy with the employer, or if they feel they've been picked on or bullied, we often see that these folks act out, and they in many cases act out in a violent manner. You don't have to look too far to see many cases of workplace violence where people have acted out against their employers. We've had them right here in St. Louis. Some of you folks may remember the situation that occurred at ABB, a company that's located in the city of St. Louis, in which they actually had an active shooter there. There have been other ones here in the area as well as the surrounding area. Terminated employees. I'll just give anybody, probably nobody on this call has the responsibility currently of managing employees, but I don't know that for sure. There may be people on here that manage employees. And I'll just take a time to, have a little levity in saying that if you consider a Post-it note with the words "you're fired" on it on their desk a proper way to terminate someone, please don't. That's not obviously a proper way to terminate somebody, and that's likely to lead to some anger and some angst. So let's not do that. But terminated employees also represent a potential threat to us. So someone who's been let go for an organization feels wronged and feels the need to come back and act out in a violent way. One that we often don't talk about or we often don't look at are employee problems outside the workplace. Now, this can be, very dangerous for the workplace. So let's consider this. You're engaged in a domestic situation where things have gotten violent and a person has had to leave the relationship, leave the partnership. They've had to move out, and they have to actually keep their location secret for fear that the other individual might come and try to do them harm. Well, that's wonderful, and that's often able to be accomplished because you have friends or family members that will, in fact, secrete your presence. However, what about the workplace? Where's that one place that the person knows that you might be between this time and this time every single day of the week? And that's why these types of situations are very difficult, because unless you quit your job, you're potentially at that same place every day, and that person knows it. So that the workplace then becomes a place where someone might come to do you harm, but could potentially harm others in the process. The second type of threat are external threats. Now, these are threats coming from the outside that potentially affect our situation. This could be anything like a disgruntled consumer. You could be at a restaurant, you could be at a shopping center, you could be at your local pharmacy, at a store, and there's potentially could be a disgruntled consumer in that location while you are there. A person who's unhappy with the way they're being treated, who feel that they've been wronged, someone that just wants to lash back out. And often these things occur in a violent manner. In our community, we have a couple of ones that sometimes are not necessarily threats in other communities, and that would be hate crimes and terrorism. So in the Jewish community, we have to be concerned, and I'm constantly monitoring two very radical ideologies that come in the form of threats to the Jewish community. One would be radical Islam, and the other one would be white supremacy. So it's often very unnerving, and you've probably heard of situations in which people who subscribe to these ideologies have been engaged in situations in our community. Most recently, Colleyville, Texas, in which an individual who's possibly had some radical Islamic ideology was looking to secure the release of a political prisoner, did in fact take hostages at that synagogue. And then we've had situations before where people have espoused ideologies of white supremacy, specifically Tree of Life Synagogue, where the individual espoused some of those ideas, and others outside of our community, like Christ Church Mosque in New Zealand. And then, as if all of this isn't enough coming at us, we have just the plain old criminal / what we see often in today's society, mental illness as being a threat. That person who might be just fine when they're on their medication, but all of a sudden escalate into a violent episode because they're not taking their medication. And if anybody on the call is familiar with situations involving mental illness, it's often a vicious cycle where a person is medicated, they feel better, and they say, I think I'm better, everything is good, and they stop taking their medication. And then they spiral into a situation that could potentially be dangerous. So these are what we call the threats to us, and they're threats to everyone. As you could see, when I talked about things like the disgruntled consumer, you could just be the innocent bystander in a particular location and, potentially be engaged all of a sudden in some sort of a violent outburst. Now, do these things happen? They do. I'm going to only use examples from our community in this, in describing these, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, each of these so that, you have at least a little bit of background. The first one, if any of you folks are from our community, you might recognize the Jewish community campus there. That's the Kansas City campus in Overland Park, Kansas. And back in 2014, there was an incident there in which an individual came to the campus and engaged in violence. One of the key takeaways from that situation is that all of the violence occurred outside. The J campus there in Overland Park is a unified campus. It's similar to the Millstone campus, except that they're all in one building. So you have all of the organizations inside of a large building, and all of the incident or the extent of the incident that occurred there occurred outside in the parking areas. So that's just the point I make there, is that, you may be in a building and maybe the building has procedures for how to respond to this. Maybe they have, places to go for safety and things of that nature. But it could also occur outside on a parking lot. It could occur, you could be walking down the street and something could occur on the adjacent parking lot or in the middle of the street in terms of incidents like road rage and things like that. The Tree of Life Synagogue, this was in Pittsburgh. The individual that was responsible for the attack there was upset with immigration policies and specifically cited the organization HIAS, which is a Jewish-related organization that deals with these types of issues, and felt the need to enact violence on that location. I want to point out that that location, the staff and the congregants received training that we often do here in our community on how to respond to an active attack. And many times when we look at these situations, they're so horrific and so heinous and so tragic that we focus very, very heavily on the victims. There's a couple of numbers, though, that I would like to at least point out to this group. And that is that, yes, there were 11 victims in that situation, but I want to make you aware that there were 75 people in the building. That means 64 people did, in fact, escape this particular individual's harmful intentions. And it's specifically in two cases, one victim was actually a physician who was actually probably in a safe location and went back in to see if he could render aid. And then the other individual was also secured in a shelter-in-place location, probably would not have been able to be reached, but exited that location potentially prematurely and unfortunately became a victim. The Chabad of Poway, this is an incident that occurred in California. And one of the things that I want to point out about this is that also in the training that we do on active attacker, we use the Department of Homeland Security training model, which is an options-based program called Run, Hide, Fight. You may have heard of it. If you've been in any type of a workplace situation, or even your kids or grandkids may have come back from school and said, hey, guess what we did today? We had to learn this thing called Run, Hide, Fight. It's an unfortunate aspect of our society today, but even the children in elementary schools are being subjected to this type of training, but for good reason. In this particular situation, there was a congregant who decided to utilize the latter portion of that option, which was the fight option, and he decided to use distraction and aggressiveness in approaching the individual that was carrying out the attack, and the individual actually turned around and departed and left the building. So, many times in a situation where there is someone that has nefarious intentions, they have a very focused plan, and they're not often able to manage distraction or disruption to that plan. And in that case, that was the case. The Young Israel of Greater Miami, also an outdoor incident, did not occur inside the building, occurred outside. These are a couple of photographs of the incident that occurred at Colleyville, Texas, that I was talking about earlier, the hostage situation there. And, one of the things that we emphasize within our community and why we do so much training is because there are a couple of statistics out there that come from an FBI study. The average police response in the United States of America is somewhere between 3 and 9 minutes for law enforcement to arrive on the scene following receiving a report of some sort of an incident. And those are incidents that are considered priority incidents. Things that are not priority, like maybe someone just, talking to themselves or acting strange or just doesn't look right, the response time could be much, much larger or much, much longer. But in this situation, all of the folks you see there have arrived on scene long after the incident is already underway. So, we have to be, we train because we have to be prepared to actually be our own first responder in these situations. I want to make just one comment about the concept of mitigation versus elimination. When we train for these things, when we provide you with tips and do's and don'ts and suggestions for how to handle certain situations, I want you to understand that we do the best that we can to come up with the best possible options, but there really is no such thing as eliminating all threats. I could say to the community, hey, could you give me carte blanche to try to make this community safe? And I could make it a whole lot safer. But most people wouldn't want to put up with the drawbridges and the moats that I would use to create a safe community, because that's really the kinds of things that you have to do, and all the checkpoints and all of the building design that would have to be redone. That's not often what we're working with. We're often working with things that have been in place for many, many years. They may be hard to retrofit, and frankly, we just can't eliminate. So what we do is we mitigate. We try to close that window to where they have the least likely opportunity, the least amount of time and space to commit an event, and then hope that they run up against the barriers and the layers of protection that we put in place to try to keep us safe and to try to keep them from being successful. So, I use the analogy of a president of the United States. Can you just fathom how much protection that a president of the United States has in terms of their Secret Service protection, but then all of the resources that the Secret Service has available to them? Many of you may not know this, but when the president is going to do a motorcade, every manhole cover along that motorcade is sealed shut. Every mailbox along that motorcade is removed. They have people on the roofs. They're able to shut down roadways and streets and businesses and all of these things. Well, we have none of that resource available, to us for the most part. So we have to provide layers of protection, in other ways. And yet, with all of that, we've still had assassinations that have been successful, and we've had assassination attempts that have been successful in injuring, thank God, and not taking the life of a current president. So let's talk a little bit about situational awareness. This is a tool that, even though it has kind of a name that gives you the connotation that would be very, very difficult to really learn and hone this skill, it's actually not as difficult as you might think. And it's a very, very, very important skill to possess. So situational awareness. I just put up a few interesting photographs that you could kind of look at real quick and say to yourself, I wonder which people in these photographs are practicing situational awareness. So in the first one, there's a fellow posing for a picture, and unfortunately, there's just an enormous shark right behind this guy who happens to be, swimming where the sharks are swimming, and he is completely unaware. Most likely the camera person is running the opposite direction or swimming the opposite direction, but this fella is completely unaware. If you notice the young lady with the vehicles on the photo, she's got her arms full with a purse. She's got probably one hand on the door handle there, but she's also taking the time to check her phone to see if she's received a text or an email, or maybe she's going to make a phone call. She's paying absolutely no attention to the fellow that's right behind her. And how easy and quickly could that individual push her into that vehicle and an abduction occur? And clearly he would have nefarious intentions. It's not there to just, help her carry things to the car. The individual in the upper photograph, this is another thing that we'll talk about here in a moment, but you may notice the two cords hanging down from underneath her hair. She's wearing headphones. If we can't hear movement around us because we're listening to music, and that's what we're listening to, or a podcast or whatever the case may be, how are we supposed to react? We have to utilize all of our senses to be able to be situationally aware. So there's just a few pictures I thought were interesting that kind of set the stage for this. So what is situational awareness? Well, the first thing is it's a choice. It's something that we have to actively seek to do because it basically is a choice. And it's not a difficult choice. It really just means being aware of those things going on around us and recognizing when there is a change. So the most basic tenet of situational awareness is something we call baseline. Every day, each one of you get up, have a routine that you go through, maybe, start your day with coffee. You have a certain place you go in the morning. You might go work out. You might go visit a relative, visit a friend, something like that. And we become creatures of habit. However, in doing that, we should be able to recognize what is normal, like what is normal for what we do. If we go and have coffee at our table in the kitchen in the morning, and normal is I look in my backyard and I look at my nice flower garden, and the sprinkler should be on at a certain time. Well, that's normal. But, if normal isn't having a black bear in your back yard that, is digging up your flower bed, then, you should probably recognize that as being something that we call, a disturbance to the baseline. So the baseline is basically what your day looks like as you go through your day without any kind of craziness or any kind of an event. And then basically we act on what we call baseline disturbances. That would mean that anything that is different or that is something that has created a difference in the baseline, this is something that we act on. And our actions, according to that disturbance, should be based on one of two things. Does the disturbance represent a threat? And those are the things we really want to be concerned about. Or is it a benign situation? So for instance, if there is a cat in your backyard that normally isn't there, that's a fairly benign situation. We might want to try to see if we can figure out who the owner is, or it might, require us to call a neighbor and say, hey, your cat's in our yard. But it probably isn't going to require us to, bolt down the door and everything like it would if there was a bear in our backyard. So that would be more of a benign disturbance or a benign anomaly to the baseline. So a couple of photographs also on this next slide, and we'll talk about threat or benign. So if you're standing in your local grocery store and there's just a big long line like that, obviously that's pretty much the baseline. There's just a big line. If all of a sudden another cash register opens up, and I assume they still call them cash registers. I don't know. Maybe they're modern now. They might not even be a cash register. Maybe it's a credit register. Anyway, if I get distracted, if there is all of a sudden an anomaly or a disturbance, and that disturbance is that another register has opened up, you might see people maybe somewhat abruptly, but more casually moving towards another register. Maybe that line thins out and some of those people are able to go to another register and be serviced at another register.
I'm available.
Hi.
Hello.
Maybe if you could just go ahead and mute yourself if you need to take a call or something. Anyway, that would constitute something that would be benign. It would be an anomaly, but it's clearly not a threat. However, if you're walking down the street towards this group of people and all of a sudden everybody coming the other direction is running away from that direction, you might want to realize that there's something going on and that could potentially represent a threat. So we begin thinking in those terms of, is the disturbance benign or is the disturbance a threat? Now, there are some obstacles that really make it difficult for us to be situationally aware. And there are 3 of them. And we're going to
I
talk.
didn't order anything.
Was that a question? Oh, okay. I think somebody might be unmuted. Anyway, there are 3 obstacles to situational awareness that we have to try to overcome. And one is just basically not monitoring the baseline. If you're one of those folks that leaves work at night and you pull up in your driveway and you don't actually remember what happened between leaving work and pulling up in your driveway, that's probably a problem. And we need to work on that. We need to try to help you develop some situational awareness, help you to be more aware. And it's happened to all of us when we've been distracted. You just say, holy smokes, am I already home? What in the heck was I so distracted for? But if we're not monitoring the baseline, if we don't know what's normal for us or what's normal for the environment around us, I mean, that can obviously be problematic. So we have to be really, really careful, not to allow ourselves to get caught up in that. Another one is called normalcy bias. And normalcy bias, you see, I have the cute little see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Basically, normalcy bias means we want things to be okay, so we just can't fathom that something might not be okay. So we walk around. I think when I was a kid, my dad used to call this Pollyanna, where you would walk around and you'd have that white picket fence mentality that everything is good, there's no bad can happen. And so when it happens, you just flat out don't want to believe it. The third one is something that we call focus lock. And I'll bet every single one of you on this program today can probably guess what the number one focus lock problem is in America and the world today. And the young lady in the drawing is telling you exactly what it is. Now, that may seem like surely no one would be talking on the phone and walk in front of a train. I hate to tell you, but it's actually happened. I don't think it's a good idea to go to YouTube and watch some of these videos, but there are videos of people falling in open manhole covers and all kinds of crazy stuff because they're talking on their phone. They have what's called focus lock. They're not paying attention. You might recall that photograph in an earlier slide where the young lady was on her phone, looking at her car, paying no attention to the individual directly behind her. So things like texting and walking into a train or being on your phone and walking to a train is focus lock. And we have to avoid these 3 things: not knowing our baseline, normalcy bias, and focus lock. So we're situationally aware. Now, what do we do with that knowledge? We're now aware of the things that are going on around us. We're making an effort to be aware of the things that are going on around us. And all of a sudden, we actually start to see things of what in my business we call for instance, a JDLR, a just doesn't look right. And we say, I just don't think that looks right. Whatever that is, it doesn't look right. I mean, why is that guy peeking in that car? He's got a hoodie on. Is he trying to, secrete his identity? And, if it's his car, how come he's not using his key fob and opening the car? Why is he just looking in that car? And so basically we promote in our community the See Something, Say Something campaign so that we can respond to these kinds of things. Well, reporting, for instance, just to give you an idea why we do it. And I know a lot of people, there's that mentality of don't get involved, all of those kinds of things. But reporting suspicious activity makes us and our community a safer place for everyone. If we're not doing it, then we're not making our community a safer place. And, we can't always rely on that one person that you used to have in the neighborhood, Mrs. Jones or whatever it was, that knew what everybody was doing at all times. And it was annoying when she knew when we got home from work and knew what we bought at, knew what we bought at the grocery store and knew what time we left in the morning. That was kind of annoying, right? However, when she saw that person, climbing over the back fence, attempting to get into our back door and called the police, all of a sudden it wasn't so annoying anymore. We really appreciated Mrs. Jones. So, reporting suspicious activity does keep both us and our community safer. So what is suspicious activity? Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So in my world, something that we train our folks on in our community on are things like a person taking notes, making drawings, taking photographs of buildings, in our case, synagogues, or day schools. Why are they out there? Look, if they're a contractor and they're trying to figure out the latest design for a construction project or some physical improvements and enhancements, and some aesthetics that are being changed, then that's great and that's good. However, they could also be looking at the building, looking for vulnerabilities. How do we get in? What are people doing? When they come out the door, do they even pay attention if there's anybody standing there, or do they just keep walking and let the door close on its own? Things like that. Strangers asking questions about the building, specifically about building security. Well, when can I come where I don't, have to deal with a locked door? And even if there is a locked door, how do I get in? Is there, an intercom? Are they watching me on the camera? Things like that. Any type of an item left behind. And we've had this in our community many times, suspicious items that have been reported, and we have to respond to them. Briefcases, backpacks, suitcases, packages left behind. It's very unnerving when all of a sudden you find something like a suitcase in your building and there's no one that's taking responsibility for it. And you start to wonder, oh my goodness, could this be a device? Cars or trucks parked in front of buildings, especially, once again, in no parking zones, places where they're not supposed to be. Now, if it's the giant Amazon or UPS truck or the FedEx truck, we probably can take a breath and, relax and breathe a little easier. However, if it's just a big old box truck with no markings, or it's a U-Haul truck or something of that nature, it's at least worth asking someone, hey, do you know why that truck is parked right out in front of the building and isn't, occupied? Or that truck is running, but there's nobody in it. Yes, that's somebody making a food delivery. Or yes, that's okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure. And believe me, the person that you reported that to should really appreciate that you're looking out for them. So persons in an area that they don't belong. If you know, for instance, that an area is an area where only staff should be, and you see somebody kind of milling around in that area, or, trying to get into an area like that, please report it. Also suspicious. And by the way, I'm just going to make a comment about suspicious activity. People are not suspicious. People's behaviors and activities are suspicious. We have to be very, very careful in terms of discriminating against people based on their look, based on maybe their ethnicity, maybe what we attribute their religion to be, those kinds of things. So we have to be, super careful with that. Immediately after 9/11, there were a number of reports of suspicious activity that basically just constituted they're wearing a head covering, or, things like that. Well, walking down the street wearing a head covering is not a suspicious activity. However, if that person were to be looking in windows, shaking door handles on cars, it just became a suspicious activity. So when we report these things, what kind of information do we want to relate? Well, for sure, we want to relate things like a brief description of what we just saw, the date and time of the location. If it's immediate, we can just tell them it's happening right now. Any physical identifiers. And you know what? We all have something nowadays that I'm going to hold up here. I don't know if you can see it, the old cell phone. And guess what those cell phones do? They're like little computers. They take photographs. We could try to give them a description, or we might just go ahead and snap a photograph so that we don't even have to worry so much about the description. And I'll just kind of mention a couple things about physical identifiers. If you ever have to give a description of somebody, or you ever have to look at a suspicious situation and know that you're going to have to give a description, do me a favor and look at the person's shoes. Okay, it's important to get a lot of information, but look at the person's shoes. And the reason I say this is that people with nefarious intentions often know that when they walk around the corner after they've just committed an act of violence or a criminal activity, they know they may have to take off their outer jacket or put on a ball cap or take off a ball cap or put on a pair of glasses or take off a pair of glasses. But you know what no one ever does? No one ever brings a second pair of shoes. So if they're wearing the bright green tennis shoes, but they have, other clothing on that they could take off, they're not going to take off those bright green tennis shoes. Were they male or female? What was their body size like? They were small, they were medium build, they were a very large person. Racial appearance, it's not being discriminatory if you're just honest about the person's racial appearance. It doesn't do us any good to say a guy just robbed the bank and he's running down the street and his appearance is he's male. If the person was a white male, you need to say they were a white male. Otherwise, we're going to be stopping everybody. And that's not helpful. Distinguishing clothing, upper to lower, but include those shoes, age group, haircut, facial hair, and any scars, tattoos, or glasses. When it comes to a vehicle, distinguishing decals or stickers. I don't know about you folks, but in the old days, I used to be able to say, wow, that's a 1970 Oldsmobile 442 or whatever the case may be, because cars were distinct. Nowadays, every single make, model, brand looks alike. I don't know. It was a silver 4-door passenger car, the Hyundai, the Kia, the Nissan, they all look alike. So it's really important if they have any distinguishing, features like decals or stickers on them that we make note of those. Color does help. I mean, we don't want to be looking for a white or yellow car if the car was silver. Any damage is a really good identifier because, people don't have, all cars don't have the same damage. Super important direction of travel. Does you no good to say a silver car left the parking lot and then the police have no idea which way to go to look for the silver car that left the parking lot. If you can get a license plate, awesome. If you can get a partial license plate, awesome. If you can tell what state it's from, get to know your own state, maybe some surrounding states, that stuff would be very, very helpful as well. So, if you know where the direction of travel, where they've gone, super important. And make sure you also give them your information so they can ask you follow-up questions if necessary. Let's talk about security at home, do's and don'ts. Let's talk about some do's. First do, always keep your door locked when you're inside your apartment. Very, very important. Don't leave your door open to where somebody can present themselves and be right there, next to you before you have a chance to react. Make sure you're putting that barrier up. Don't open the door for someone that knocks. Talk to them through the door. Use the peephole. If you have an intercom, use the intercom. But don't open that door. Once again, you've just made it very, very easy for that person to force their way in, shut the door, and now they're inside the residence with you. And your calls for help might be muffled by the building itself, and you might not be able to alert someone that you're potentially in trouble. Do talk to them through the door, and always bring your phone to the door so that you can make a call for help immediately. So if the person does end up trying to beat the door down, kick the door, try to gain entry by force, you're already on the phone reporting this situation. I put on here campus security because if you're on our campus, that's what you do, but do call the police or the security at the location that you're at. If you know that, if you're in a building that has security, that type of thing, or you're at the workplace and they have security, if you feel uncomfortable at all about anyone, please reach out and dial 911. Nobody is going to be upset at you if you say that, hey, look, there's a person looking in windows, they're knocking on doors, not sure what I think they're trying to see if people are home. Could you send the police? Please don't allow someone to piggyback or tailgate into a building. Also extremely important. If you're in a secure space, but you let somebody in who didn't have the right to be there or wasn't authorized to be there, extremely problematic. And don't hide keys in really, really, really obvious places like under the welcome mat or in the mailbox or things like that. Try to make sure that you have your keys with you so that you don't have to hide one. Additional safety tips for that, keep your emergency numbers handy and maybe have your phone set with a 911 for emergency dial. And the know locations of your building exits. This is important for all kinds of emergencies, including fire. where you can get out of the building quickly. Know where there's a fire extinguisher if need be, in case you actually have to confront something like a fire. And then exercise caution when getting in an elevator, especially when there's someone in the elevator that you don't know. And if you feel uncomfortable, wait it out. Tell the person, oh, I'm sorry, I must have forgotten something. If you feel uncomfortable, let them go ahead and go, and then take the next elevator. When you're on the go, let's talk about some things that you can do while you're on the go. So one of the don'ts, don't identify publicly and indicate publicly when you're going to be away from home. Don't be posting pictures of your trip or who you're visiting or the grandkids or whatever and say, I'm right here, right now with my grandchild in, Illinois, which tells everybody and their brother that you are not home and that potentially your house could be a possible target for a burglary. Do take your cell phone with you everywhere. It can be a lifesaver in a variety of ways. Something that I like to have in case of a medical emergency is a contact in my phone that says ICE. And what that is that if something were to happen to me and I'm unable to communicate who I want contacted, emergency services can look through my phone and they can see ICE. It stands for in case of emergency. They dial that number and say, look, the person that we're here with, he's a male, this is this description, and he has you listed as ICE. And, in that case, obviously my wife who's listed as ICE would either, well, hopefully she's going to say she knows me and that, she'll be there to help out and doesn't take advantage and say, no, I'm not sure who that is. Just a little levity, sorry. But also do practice that situational awareness we talked about at all times. And whenever possible, travel in a group, travel with a friend. Don't be by yourself so that you maybe potentially look like you're more vulnerable because you're all alone. Walk with your head up and give the appearance of awareness. Don't have your head buried in your phone. Don't be digging through your purse, and don't try to do things at your vehicle like open the back door, set the purse on the back seat, lean inside your trunk, all of those kinds of things. Get in your vehicle, lock the door, and then you can use your phone for GPS or whatever you need to. Don't set your purse or bags down while in a public space. You're just asking for trouble. Don't flash money and credit cards. That's also something that could potentially draw someone's attention to you. And avoid talking to strangers if you can and responding to panhandlers. Sometimes these people also suffer from mental illness, not always, but someone, could potentially take a no for an act of aggression and become violent with you. And then always try to stay in well-lit areas. I probably don't have to tell anybody in this group this, but don't take a shortcut down an alleyway or, a back way or someplace where there are no street lights or there are no people around. Try to stay in those well-lit areas. So it is now time for those questions we talked about. And I'm going to take a quick peek at the chat. Nope, that was just somebody being told. Sure, we can absolutely. In fact, Laura, they're asking about the slides being shared, and I believe that you're going to put this program up somewhere, right?
Correct, we're recording, that's correct.
So you'll be able to go back and look at the program. I know we have to get through a whole lot of material in a short period of time. It probably doesn't, hopefully it seemed like a short period of time. It goes by pretty quick. But yes, we'll be putting the information up so you can go back and refer to it. Happy to do that. It's important because it is a lot to digest all at once. We try to give you some meat, but unfortunately, sometimes that meat includes the potato and corns, and it's also a little bit difficult to grab all of that all at once. Does anyone have any questions? I'm happy to talk about specific instances, issues, or anything of that nature. Any question you might have about personal security, about things that we look at in the community, just really anything.
Well, I have a little question.
Sure.
Okay, this is
Simca.
Simca. Yes, about shades, blinds that you have in a home. My husband and I disagree about this sometimes, but should they be slanted down on the inside or slanted up to where, the light either goes up if it's light outside or the down? And it's the reason is for who could look in.
Mhm.
Do you have
Wow,
an opinion?
yeah, so that is probably one of the most specific questions that I've actually ever taken. And my wife and I have the same conversation. So it's very interesting that you brought that up. In our situation, our bedroom happens to be elevated, which means that, it is off the ground. So if an individual is ground level and looking up, we probably wouldn't want our slats facing up because they would be more likely to be able to look in. So in our case, we face the slats down so that they really can't, see. However, if you're on the ground level, maybe it's just the opposite, so that if anybody is trying to look, they'd almost have to lay on the ground and look up, which would make them, what it would make them? A little suspicious, right? What's the person doing laying on the ground outside your window? So maybe if a neighbor happens to be looking out or whatever, someone standing in your backyard, they may not pay attention, but someone laying on the ground next to your window, pretty sure that even the person that keeps to themselves is going to pay attention. So I think it really has to do a lot with, and then also it has to do with the design of the blind. Frankly, some blinds are so tight that you can't see anything, not even where the strings are. You can't even see through. They're just built so well that it almost doesn't matter which way you put the slats. But if it's a normal blind that, allows for a little bit of seepage in terms of view or light, then, I would just consider that, that concept of, where is your bedroom window in terms of the ground?
Very helpful. Thank you.
You bet.
Does anyone else have any questions for Scott today?
I gave you a lot to digest. Hopefully there was something in there that that will be helpful to you, some little tips that might be helpful. But I really, was hoping that we would, at least see something, say something for reporting suspicious activity, but also that situational awareness that maybe today, you'll start to say to yourself, I'm gonna kind of pay attention and, make note of my baseline, but I'm also going to look for those things that, that maybe seem out of place. I'm going to be a more observant and more vigilant, neighbor and friend of the community, and see if there's, things out there that I could potentially report. And I will just, reiterate that, people like myself, law enforcement, we have absolutely no problem with you doing so, and we actually encourage it.
Steph, there is one more question.
Perfect.
Asking about carrying an alarm. What do you recommend about carrying an alarm?
Yeah, so I think those are great. The one, but I say the simplest operation, right? I would be very hesitant to get something that had multiple steps, and I'm going to tell you why. When we're under duress, one of the first things that goes is our fine motor skill. It's one of the reasons why exit doors on buildings have that push panic bar, because if it was something like you have to run up to it, use your badge, punch in a code, stick your eyeball down there to get a retina scan. If that was, we would forget half of those steps, and we would forget the code, and we'd push in the wrong code, and it's because our fine motor skills just flat out go away. And we also can't remember as many things. There's another scientific fact called brain channel capacity that says that the average human can do about 7 things simultaneously. That means we can really be doing a lot of things. So when your husband or wife says, hey, you're not paying attention to me, you can say, well, no, my brain channel capacity allows for me to do 7 things at once. But guess what that number goes down to when you're under duress? 3. That's why we have programs like run, hide, fight, stop, drop, and roll. That's why your social security number is in clusters of 3, and phone numbers are in clusters of 3. And a lot of things that we have in our lives are in clusters of 3 because it's easier to remember. If you're under duress, still easy to remember versus not being able to remember those things. So, I would just say that, that it is very good idea to carry a personal alarm. Personal alarms draw attention. We know that people don't necessarily react to those things, but they absolutely do draw attention. Now, you probably have heard that, car alarms have gotten so commonplace that, nobody really pays attention. But I'm telling you that noise gets people's attention, even if it's annoying. And even if they're upset by the noise. It's one of the reasons why I promote that everybody keep this little, wait, I got to get to where you can see it. I got to turn it a certain angle. Can anybody tell what let's see, it's still not doing it. Where's my camera? There we go. See what that is? Everybody know key fob? It's my key fob, right? Guess where my key fob, and I'm in the business and I can protect myself pretty well, but guess where my key fob is every night when I go to bed? On my nightstand. You know why? Because one of the things I can do if I ever think that someone's trying to get into my house, I can set off the alarm on my car. And all of a sudden my car alarm is going off in the driveway and it's making a whole lot of noise. And I'm going to tell you right now, unless the person is targeting me and really wants to get in and hurt me, they're not going to stick around very long with that kind of a thing going on. So not only your home alarm, but your car can become an alarm as well. So in terms of having a personal alarm that you can't take with you, absolutely. Make as much noise as possible, draw as much attention as possible.
That's great. Thank you, Scott. Any
Other questions?
Yeah, any other questions?
Specific alarm. Is that a specific, okay, like a brand? Elise, I'm not sure if that's what you're looking for. I think, like I said, I think the most important thing is that, it's loud and that it's easy to use. Something that, they make an alarm where maybe there's a strap that goes around your wrist. And when the alarm is separated from the strap, if someone were to try to grab it out of your hand or whatever, it engages. Or you can grab it and pull it and it engages. Something like that, would probably be pretty beneficial because it's easy to use and it would also activate itself if for some reason someone was able to grab it from you and not allow you to engage it.
Scott, I think you've done a wonderful job this morning. We really appreciate all your insights and your guidance. And I know that it's really helpful, especially these days when certain events are nagging and weighing heavily on our minds.
Laura, could I ask you to grab a screenshot or whatever of the attendees, just so we have an idea of how, unless you already have that list. That would
I
be
already have that list. Yeah.
super. Okay. And listen, everyone on the call, thank you for taking personal safety and security seriously. It is one of the most important things that we can do. We need to be around for our family and our loved ones, and we need to be aware of what's going on around us. And we need to be really a good citizen and part of our community in terms of reporting these types of incidents. They do happen. It's unfortunate, and some of them are tragic and heinous and horrific. But the more that we act together as a community to try to be prepared and to report things before they become a problem, the better off we are.
Thank you.
And now, I will end you with a phrase that I end all of the alerts that I send out to the community, and that is stay vigilant, stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.